Hello and welcome to everyone to this new episode of Gupshup with Gill. Today we have someone who's been in the T20 circuit for far too long, not in the capacity of being a cricketer or being a coach or being an analyst, but he's someone who's a strategy manager with a PSL team. I have with me Hassan Cheema of Islamabad United. Welcome, Hassan. Welcome to the show. Thank you for taking out the time to coming on Gupshup with Gil.
Yeah, hi, Sat Sri Akal and everything. And I really like the fact that you refer to it as far too long.
No, because the reason why I did it because I've had different people who've been analysts, who've been a consultant. So I just wanted to get that part right because there's a slight difference always in the rules, and I wanted to get that part right. And Sat Sri Akal to you too. Hope we have a great show and hope you enjoy it.
Sure.
Now, I want to start by asking about your journey. You, like many people, I think, in the subcontinent, did your engineering. Then you even took up an engineering job, I think, for 2 to 3 years. So, how did that transformation happen from being a project manager in a civil engineering project to being a strategy manager at a T20 team, more specifically at PSL? So, how did this transformation happen?
So the idea of getting into sports, even with the engineering background, came about because I went to ESPN Star office jo tha in Singapore. Like I went there a couple of times while I was still in college for like different things. Because I went to undergrad in Singapore. So after that, like even when I started working at an engineering job, there was still that in the back of my mind that this is a possibility that I have. That if I had been in say Pakistan or somewhere else, that would never have come about. So like I was thinking about that. So then you can't really go and tell them that I'm really passionate about sports. So I want to join your company. So that's how I started writing. I started writing blogs and stuff like that. So I would work like 6 days a week of my engineering job, and the seventh day I would write a blog. So I did that for like a year or two. Got good enough at it, and then I had like a few friends, like somebody like Emmer Nakwi. Emmer Nakwi was the first guy said to me to go from blogs to Dawn, which is the biggest English newspaper in Pakistan. So I started writing for them. I did that part time, like just as a blogger for like a year, and then I decided that I'll take a year off. It was supposed to be a year off from my engineering life and see if I can. I talked to Usman Samyuddin about that, and he said if you want to go through with it, you have to do it like you have to fully commit to it. So I gave my saved a little bit of money, gave myself a year, and see where I would be at the end of that year. And by the end of that year, I was writing for Cricinfo. Within 18 months of leaving my job, I was doing a TV show in Pakistan. So like it turned out well. So I did that for like 3-4 years. And my entire thing was because I didn't come from the club cricket scene, the local scene. I didn't have those contacts, those networks and stuff like that. So the thing I could do, especially with my engineering background and my understanding of numbers, was to have to try to analyze the game, the domestic game and the international game from a purely analytical perspective. And I was also inspired by उस वक्त already American sports में आ चुका हुआ था. There was a lot of stuff in American sports, Moneyball or like NBA में हो रहा था. Like the Moneyball movie came about, I think 2010, 11. Even prior to that, I was a huge fan of that book. Michael Lewis wrote that, I think 2001, 2002 के Oakland A's के ऊपर. So like from then on, I always had this idea that this is something that can be applied to cricket. And once I came back to Pakistan, that was something that I always wanted to say. And everyone in Pakistan would tell me, you can't, that doesn't happen in cricket, or like, there's always an old school general backlash to any progressive analytical thing. So so that was my entire thinking. Like I was going to be the journalist who did stuff like analytically, like John Hollinger writes for ESPN for the NBA and stuff like that. But then the PSL launched, and Rehan, whom I met on my TV show, and we become like best friends. Him and I applied together to all of the 6 franchises. We got calls from 2 of them. We ended up joining Islamabad. We ended up joining Islamabad as the draft analysts, and they were impressed by our work at the draft. They appointed us managers basically as Wasim Akram's right and left hand men. Basically, Wasim Bhai would give the orders, and we would do everything that we could do. And from then on, it's just been now pretty much the two of us run the franchise. So it's been like in a decade, I've gone from like a construction engineering job in Singapore to like running a PSL team. So, I mean, it turned that 1 year off turned out well, I guess.
It turned out very well. You mentioned Wasim Akram, and I just can't stop this urge of myself of cracking that joke that would Wasim Akram have a chat with you in the morning, like he usually keeps saying.
Yeah. He would want to, but I don't generally wake up in the mornings. So like otherwise, because he has this thing of like even at the start he was like everyone wake up at 6 a.m. to go on a jog. Dubai, that was before Pakistan mein wapis hai, before COVID and everything. So you could go out. So like everyone, all of the management wake up at 6 a.m. to go jogging on the beach, and we're like, you can go alone. We don't need to come.
No disrespect to Wasim Bhai, but we all love him here in India. But it's just that all commentators have some cliches, and with Wasim Bhai, it's become a very funny cliche that whenever Wasim Bhai is there or he's commentating, all of us, especially I see a lot of this on Twitter. People just pick up a few phrases and try and make sentences. I had a chat with him this morning because he actually does that a lot, and it's something I think a lot of cricketers love about him, but it's just something that you can joke about him, and
Yeah, I
I
mean,
hope
it's
he
a cliche.
doesn't, and I hope he doesn't take it wrongly.
Yeah, of course. No, he understands that. I mean, at the end of the day, he's still commentating in his third language, and like he like most cricket commentators is sort of overexposed. So like, I think he takes it in his stride.
Well, another thing that you mentioned in the first answer was one your how you applied with Rehan ul Haq, and now that you've mentioned, I want to ask you. I see that you and Rehan are just sort of together so many of the times, whether it be on your Instagram stories or anywhere. So, what are you like
Yeah.
brothers from another mother, or how is the relationship between the two of you? Because you really seem like one of those, like, we have a lot of friendships that we keep talking about on the field.
Mhm.
There's Sachin Tendulkar, Saurav Ganguly. Nowadays, there have been other friendships as well where I can't remember the name, but yeah, between say a Rohit Sharma and a Yuzvendra Chahal, these are the friendships that you keep talking about. I sort of get the similar feeling from the relationship of yours and Rehan's. Is it something like that, or it's just that you've spent so much time together that everything comes naturally?
No, it's like the thing that you mentioned, like the brothers from another mother sort of thing, because we didn't meet until we were like in our mid-20s and stuff like that. We ended up staying in the same. We were doing a TV show and we were staying in the same room for like 40 days, and we just like we would do our show for like 4, 5, 6 hours football, and we would come back and we would just discuss football or cricket or life in general. And that's the other thing, like his political and his social viewpoints are very similar to mine. His background is very similar to mine. So it's sort of like we had that. Plus the other thing is that we always had right from the start like uh, sort of like we're never going to shaft each other. There's that sort of loyalty towards each other. So we actually sacrifice for each other at some point. He has sacrificed far more for myself than I have for him, for instance. So like there's that level of respect as well. So it's sort of like even if we weren't like at the same franchise, even if it's him or I stop working in cricket, we'd still be best friends. So like wo jo ek cheez hai, like that was the case even before the PSL, and if there is no PSL, I hope that is still the case.
Well, very good to know that. You also mentioned about how you were actually brought in as draft managers. Now, a lot of us in India don't really know about how a draft works, because in the IPL we have an auction system. And I had Gaurav Sundaraman on the show. He spoke of how, regardless of how many permutations and combinations you run on softwares, you run on models, you run it yourself, uh, the auction day is never going to be the even 50% same of what you prepare for. So
Yeah.
are there similar challenges in a draft system, or you think it's much more easier to manage, and you can still prepare for it in some way or the other? Just take us through the process of how a draft system, how
Yeah.
preparation for a draft system works, and then how does it unfold on that day?
So as far as the preparation for the draft is concerned, it's sort of like you have an 8-man list of the guys that you're retaining. So you, if you have a draft from like 0.0, then you have to prepare a lot more for it. So you have to fulfill all the roles of the 11 that you have, of the 16 that you have essentially. So like उसमें आप ये देखते हो कि you look at it that say we have the 3rd pick in the 1st round. So we know that we'll have a list of like 3 guys. We know that we won't have 2 of them, but we can still get that 3rd guy, and then we can build the team around that sort of thing. So like you'll never get your first choice unless you have the 1st pick. You'll never get your first choice. So the advantage that you have in an auction is that if you really want someone, you would go all in on him, and like you can overspend for him just to have them. That's not an option that you have in the draft. In the draft, you have to settle a lot of the times. But the good thing with the draft is that you at least know, like if there's like 3 guys, then one of those 3 guys you are going to get. If it's a gold category, if you have the 4th pick, then you will get the 4th best guy. And in a lot of times, especially in emerging, you might have someone at number 1 and you might get him at the 4th or the 5th pick because other people might not rate him as you do. So you will never get your first possible option, but you'll still have enough alternatives to fulfill that. In the auction, it's sort of like you might not have your first choice, your second choice, your third choice. You might be outbidded every time. So that is where it makes it difficult, but it's also an added advantage because if you really want someone, if you have a Rashid Khan or an Andre Russell and you want to go all in on them, then you can go out and spend like 15-20% of your budget on that guy. You can overpay for him and get him, and like then you can sort of believe that 1 or 2 main guys, if you have like 3 or 4 really world-class players, that will be enough, which I mean 10 years of RCB proves that that's not the case, but like in general, like with most teams, that's the case.
RCB fans are not going to like this. They anyway, get picked a lot
so
on
that's
social media.
That's what I'm going to say. So I used to think when the IPL auction would happen, like there is a sense of ego, but there's also like an experience that if I wanted to do it, I could do it like better than these guys who are doing. And then you talk to a lot of the guys who are running the auction, and they tell you the pressures that they have from owners, from players, from captains, from coaches. We don't have to deal with a lot of that. We've got great owners. We've generally had good coaches who let us do our thing. So that made me realize that it would be really, really hard. But like then you still see some teams and you're like, because RCB, I always had like a soft spot for RCB because I liked Kohli right from the start. AB de Villiers and Dale Steyn are probably 2 of my favorite like non-Pakistani players of the past 15-20 years. We had Samuel Badri with us the 2 years at the PSL, and he went off to play for RCB as well. So I always had sort of a soft spot for RCB, and also the fact that if you got like Kohli and de Villiers batting together, it's really hard for you to root against them. So I sympathize with those RCB fans because a lot of their frustrations, not as much as them, but like 5-10% of that I've always also lived through while watching RCB. So I can sympathize with them.
I am a Delhi Capitals fan, so I have the similar level of frustration because
the thing with Delhi is Delhi was never even good enough until like 3-4 years ago.
But the first 5 years they were pretty good. The first year they qualified for the semis. The second year they were actually topped the group, and then they lost to a freak Adam Gilchrist innings. The third year they ended 5th, and then 2012. So in the first 5 seasons, Delhi had qualified for the playoffs three times, and from there on, then it was just downhill. So there's one thing. One is you don't have any expectations. So if the team loses, you're fine. But then once you've seen the good days and then you see them struggle, then it becomes really difficult.
Yeah, but makes sense.
But moving on, you spoke of how at Islamabad United you don't have that pressures of the owner or of someone else, and I think this is a very important point because I was speaking to Gaurav Sundaraman, who's worked with teams during the auction. And because a lot of revenue is also based on the sponsorships that teams generate, sometimes there are pressures to buy a marquee player and see how it might turn out. Now, in that respect, Islamabad United initially had Babar Azam, and now they don't have it anymore. So, at any point of time, does the think tank feel that maybe we shouldn't have let him go because, of the point of the thing? I'm not talking from a cricketing point of view. I'm just
Yeah.
talking from a revenue model point of view, because he's one player who has fans all over the world, even in India, and he can bring in sponsorship money, he can bring in gate money whenever the crowds are allowed back in. So, is there ever that
Yeah.
regret of letting Babar Azam go?
I think that a couple of times that's been mentioned from the owners, but like for me and Rehan, it's always been clear, like we've never made a decision from like a financial or like a marketing perspective. If you look at like 6 years of drafts, you look at all the players that we picked, we've never picked a guy for his starry, for basically him being a star and stuff like that, for him being anything except what he was going to offer us on the field, and which isn't the best way to run a franchise, but we believe it's the best way to run the team at least. So like that's all I'm concerned about. Like it's maybe not ideal, but for me, like the only thing that matters is what is your performance on the field, what you're giving us off the field. Like I'd take a Hales or a Monroe or something like that. Like a lot of guys that we've had, look at like probably the best player that we've had in 6 years is Luke Ronchi, and like I don't think Luke Ronchi until the PSL 3, I don't think he probably ever did an ad or anything like that. So like we've always thought about players from a purely cricketing perspective and how they fit into the dressing room, that sort of thing.
Now, now that you've mentioned about how Islamabad United goes around picking players, but obviously there's more to building a team and constructing a team and building a structure than just picking players. So I want to understand from you, what is it that works for Islamabad United? Because now over the 6 seasons of PSL, you could safely say that it's one of the best teams of PSL. This edition also, you guys were quite close to winning the title once again. You had 8 wins out of 10, while other teams had 5 out of 10, and unfortunately you couldn't
Yeah.
close from there on. So what is it that consistently works for Islamabad United and ensures that they're in the last four and always in the running to win the title? What is it that works for you, Islamabad United?
Well, we haven't won for 3 years, so like saying anything right now might not be ideal. But like as far as like when you talk to like people in the other teams, you talk to franchises around the world, the one thing that we've always believed in is let people make mistakes. Let people actually give them the backing that making a mistake is not an issue. It's no one is doing that deliberately. No one wants to get out early. No one wants to get hit for 40, 45, 50 runs because like his own career is being affected, right? Like we might he'll have 3 or 4 failures. Next year we'll drop him and we'll get somebody in his stead. So everyone who's playing is playing under the pressure, not just of that match or that tournament, but also of his entire career. And this being the big, for a lot of Pakistani guys, especially this being the biggest thing, that is the biggest matches that he's ever played. So in that case, if we are going to be on his backside all the time, trying to get him to motivate and fire him up, that might not be ideal. So like that's one thing. From the draft perspective, we look at like believe in the data over everything else. Yes, you believe your eyes. Yes, you look at like everyone's character and you check that around, but believe in data. Like sometimes you might get a guy who perhaps I don't like as a cricketer, for instance, like from a cricketing purist fan perspective. But if his data says that he is going to perform for me, then I'll still pick him because like he has that evidence for me. That's the in the draft or like the strategizing and like making plans and stuff like that. And then the second half is once the guys are out, yes, you give them plans based on data. Yes, you give them all of that stuff. But that data is always as a safety net. Whatever he wants to do, what his plan is, what his strengths are, you back him and you back him to deliver. You expect him to deliver in that regard. So in a lot of teams, in a lot of franchises around the world, what I see is guys, whether that's a foreign player or whether that's a young player, the only guys who are like consistently going to play are like the domestic players who play for the national team, right? Those guys are always going to be there. But like the domestic non-international players, the emerging players, them and the foreign players, those are the two things that you have to land. Those are the guys that you have to try to maximize their performances. in any way whatsoever. And that's the thing that, I mean, PSL 5, that's we've been good at. Like, if you take out PSL 5, we've had more than 60% wins. We had a really bad experience in PSL 5, but the thing that you also see is, like, you look at PSL 2, you look at PSL 5 again, the years that we didn't perform, like, you learn far more from seasons that you fail in than the ones that you succeed in.
That is the last line that you said is something that a lot of people also say, whether they be in the sports industry or be in any other industry, that you learn a lot from your failures. Now, you mentioned about how you rely on data. Now, the one thing that I want to ask from you, and I've asked this to other analysts as well who've been on the show and who actually believe in data, whether be it Ben Jones, Gaurav Sundaraman, or Jared Finger. Now, what is the perfect synergy between data and instinct? Because sometimes the sample space can be too small, or sometimes the data could be such that it, like I said, the sample space is too small, or you may not be having those players who can deliver on that data. So if you have an opposition batsman who struggles against a short ball bowled at 140 plus, but if you don't have that bowler who can bowl consistently short at 140 plus, how do you then work around it? Also, like you yourself mentioned, that when there's a progressively new idea against something that has been running on for years, how do you ensure that the think tank or the players unlearn that? Because they've been doing something for a very long time and they've been successful at it. So how does that whole process take place of that unlearning? I think that is something which is very, very important to me from a fan's point of view.
I think that unlearning thing is like a constant. It's sort of like what's that Greek myth about, like, rolling a boulder up the hill? I forget what the character's name is, but like, it's sort of like that you're always consistently like fighting against something that you're never going to succeed at. So like, one of the things with the unlearning is, we believe from a data perspective that wickets are still overvalued in T20 cricket. So we're fine with being, say, we're better off being 75 for 3 than 60 for 1 at the end of the power play, right? But that's not how cricket works. That's what I would like to believe. But that when a cricketer comes in at like 80 for 4, even if you tell him to go out and smash from ball 1, he'll still take 10, 12 balls, because that's the rebuilding phase. That's what he's been taught since he was 12 years old. His 10, 15, 20 years of playing cricket, that's the way he's played. So that constant unlearning still has to happen, which is why you see the best T20 players over and over again are guys who play T20 the most and who play T20 far more than other formats, because they now understand the way this format works. So you look at say somebody like a Pollard or an Andre Russell, like, those are the best players in the world, or a Rashid Khan. Like, Rashid isn't really an elite level ODI. We saw it in the World Cup. He isn't like the best ODI spinner in the world. He had a 10th, but he doesn't have a lot of success in Test cricket. He doesn't have a lot of Test matches, to be honest, but like, he's played like 250 or something T20 matches already. So like, he has that experience. He understands that in every way possible. So that unlearning always has to happen. And as far as the data versus instinct is concerned, it's like, it's a case by case basis. And like, the thing that you mentioned is most important. Like, the sample size is the most important thing. You need to have somebody who's played like 40, 50 plus T20 games. If you've got somebody who's played 1 season, 2 seasons, you can't really judge him on his data. That alone is not enough. So the eye test comes in, then what everyone else within the cricketing fraternity thinks of him. And a lot of times the cricketing fraternity is very wrong. Like, I mean, one of the first blogs I ever wrote was about Fawad Alam back in 2010. Why isn't he in the team? And for the next 10 years, all I heard was, no, he's not good enough for international cricket. No, he's not good enough. Like, from everyone, like, there is no one in Pakistan cricket that I didn't talk to about him, and they were all saying he wasn't good enough, even though the data supported otherwise. And that's the thing. Like, when I look at data, it's not just the T20 game or the white ball game that I'm looking at data. Data also works for the longest format. And now he's proving he's got 200 or 300 in like 6 months, because this is someone who's always scored runs. His data has always backed them up. So that's the sort of thing where you think, okay, you have to believe in data, even if your eye test might not believe that this guy is like good enough. You might think he might not have the technique, but like, if he's averaging 56, 57, then there's a reason he's averaging 56, 57. So that's where it comes in. And then you have to be really careful about the data, because it's not people, when people think about data, it's like the whole overall sample of it. Like somebody goes at 7.1 and over. But what is that 7.1 and over? Where he was bowling, the quality of opposition that he was facing, the quality of batsmen that he was facing, and the overs that he was bowling. Like the first over is an easy over, the seventh over is an easy over. Like those are things that you know. The 18th over is a really hard over. Going at like 9 and over in the 18th over, if someone does that, then that guy is a world-class bowler. So those are the sort of things that you have to understand. So that's the one thing that we've learned over the 6 years, is to go from like overall data as like a complete thing to like very specified based on ground, opposition, and the phase of play. Based on that, you look at the data. And now, like we look at like teams in the IPL, or you look at the way Crickwiz is doing, especially with the stuff that England national team does, and that's the thing that gives you motivation or also guidance. Like we don't need to innovate as such. We just need to catch up to those. We need to catch up to Mumbai Indians. We need to catch up to the England national team. There's not a lot of other franchises or teams around the world that we feel like we are behind in, but like these are teams that we look at and we're like, we can learn from them.
Now, another thing on the perspective of the players, that is these squads which franchises have, they're obviously big ones. They're not your 15-man squads. They're 18, 20, even 20 plus. We have 23, 24 in the IPL to account for injuries, because it's also a long season. Now, how do you deal with a player who, the player knows also after a few games is going to stay on the bench? Because that can also be a very difficult place to be, because especially if it's an overseas player, because you've traveled from a different country. And even it becomes even more difficult in current times, because you also have to stay in the bubble. You really can't do anything else, but you can go back in your hotel room, sit at the bench, then come back and be involved in team meetings and sort of still know that you may not play. So how do you deal with those players? Because it's very important to keep their morale high as well.
So like the thing with us is like this year we had 24 across the 2 legs. We had 24 guys. 22 of them played at least one game. So like we've always had this belief, well, if you're losing, then you experiment, because like you're losing, you try to figure stuff out. And if you're winning, you still experiment, in the sense we rested Shadab for one game this year. We rested Hassan, had to miss one game because of a personal thing. Fahim missed a few games. We didn't have Monroe for the first leg. You have your limitations, but you also try to experiment as much as possible within that 11 as well. That's where a lot of the flexibility in the batting order, like the things that we're famous for, that comes in, because you try everything possible, because there's a lot of, if you got 10 games, or if you're in the IPL you got 14 or 16 games, there's a lot of time for you to experiment. Teams become too conservative with like trying to win just that one game, rather than like come the playoffs, if you've got like 14 guys who are all in form, it's really difficult to stop you. That's what we learned from like both PSL1 and PSL3. So that's one of the things, like with everyone, as soon as they join the team, we're like, you have to be mentally ready. You have to be. So no one is told, or no one is going to even be given the indication that now that you're on the bench, that you're going to be on the bench for the rest of the tournament. So that's the first thing, that like everyone has to be ready at any point. Like as soon as someone switches off, what happens if the guy who's in his place gets hand injury, gets a hamstring injury, gets a muscle injury, gets anything, gets hit on the head, now there's the entire concussion thing as well. So everyone has to be ready. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, we've always taken pride in the culture and the launderness of our dressing room, which is like, basically we've always had this belief, like from year one, which we also learned from Wasim I, which was that if these are guys who are going to go out and play a high pressure, intense and that sort of game, you don't want them being under pressure for the remaining like 20 hours of the day and like building up for that. It's about being professional on the field, in the nets, in practice, coming on time. All of that is part of being professional. But like at the end of the day, you're playing a sport, man. You're not like a doctor in a COVID ward. You're not fighting any wars. It's at the end of the day, it's something that you've been dreaming about since you were like 8, 10, 12 years old. This is a privilege that a lot of those guys have. So why not actually enjoy the fact that you're there? Why not enjoy the fact that you've gotten to this point. So I've been told by like players from across the world that we've had one of the best experiences that they've had is in our dressing room. And the only reason for that is that there is no hierarchy as such. We always believe like it's just friends hanging out, that sort of thing. There's always one or two bad apples, but like if the mass, if the quorum is positive and like optimistic, then those guys also come in with the flow. And so that comes in, like the fact that everyone needs to be ready, that comes in. And the third thing is like you need to understand people. Like you need to understand if there's a guy who's not going to play, who's had like a couple of bad games and he's sitting outside, he will pout, he will whinge, and that is understandable. If you prepare like an entire year for this exact tournament and you have two bad games and it seems like you're not going to be playing anymore, then obviously you feel bad, you feel depressed, you feel all of those things. So then at that moment you have to understand that person. Is that the sort of person that you want to talk to so that you can lift his spirits up and stuff like that, or is that the sort of person who needs to be left alone in such an environment? So that's where a lot of those things come in. And with like national teams, with that's why you see a lot of franchise going with the same guys. Even if someone's not really performed one season or two seasons, they'll still go with that guy because they know him as a person and they know like what he is like when he's out of the team, what he's like when he's out of form, and all of that stuff. So understanding people, I feel like, especially in the franchise game, because you're there for like a month and a half, like in the IPL, maybe for 2 months, no one is going to teach you, no one is going to coach you into something new. Yes, you can change sort of like a mentality sort of thing match by match, but like no one's going to change any technique or anything like that over the course of those 5-6 weeks. But what you can do is like you can understand those people and like try to maximize them from a human perspective.
There are a few things that you mentioned there. The last one which you mentioned was the continuity, and it's something that others who've been a part of the IPL have also mentioned that because it's a short tournament, only have 2 months. It's not that you're spending a lot of time together like you do in the EPL or football leagues where you've 8-9 months together. So you have to get your act together very soon, and that is why there's a lot of comfort zone which is involved in, be it picking the support staff or picking the players, because the franchises want to be sure that they're able to have an environment where everyone's trying, getting the maximum out which they can possible. And hence, sometimes there's resistance to change, especially if you are getting decent results. If you're not, and on the flip side of it, if you're not performing at all, like you can take the case of Punjab Kings. I don't want to mention RCB. Like the Punjab Kings, a franchise which has only qualified for the last four twice, once in 2008 and then in 2014. So because they don't do well, there are a lot of changes which also don't help them. The other thing that you mentioned here, and it's a very important thing, because we do sometimes, even in India, start equating cricketers to the people who are on the borders, or the doctors start saying that this is a war. So it's very important that you mentioned that it's not the same. It's nowhere, and I completely agree with it, that it's nowhere the same. The people who are out there in the COVID wards or at the borders, they do a much tougher job than what the cricketers do.
It's actually closer to being an artist than it is to being a Fauji. Like think of it that way. Like this is someone who's out there trying to express himself, trying to, this craft of his, this skill of his, he's trying to show that in that way. Like I mean, with Pakistan and India, like obviously like the national teams are like so ingrained with the ideas of nationalism, like that whatever we say, that's not going to change. But like at least within franchise cricket, you can sort of bring in that culture which exists in, like say, the NBA, or well, not the NFL. Everyone in the NFL thinks they're in the army as well. But like as far as the NBA is concerned, like that's a model that I want to follow. Like to an extent, even like modern European football is the dressing rooms are run that way.
Also, you mentioned Londa-ness. Just want to take a moment and tell to our viewers that Londa is something that is used in Punjabi and North Indian culture to depict machoism. If I think I've got that part right, depict machoism in males. Not sure in what context people take it, but it's used in that sense. The context could be very different depending upon how people want to use it. And Yeah, I can totally picture it, especially with Wasim bhai, being at the helm.
Yeah.
And so